It's an exhibition of living sculptures, and it really has to do with a dialogue Klaus and I have had for more than 20 years. And we wanted to basically come up with an exhibition which would bring living sculptures together as a group show. That was the point of departure. Then we had endless and endless conversations. It had to do with an exchange about scores and instructions, and how we could actually get an exhibition which wouldn't be like Do It, where the artists would just send instructions, but where the artists would be very involved in actually executing their instructions, so to make their instructions into a composition, to execute, to realize their instruction. And then it all had to do with a visit in the Villa Borghese.
I think it's a very simple rule of the game. So you have 14 galleries. Each gallery have a door. So you open the door, and each gallery is a sculpture. The sculpture is always one or more human beings, but never the artist. It's a very simple rule of the game. And as Hans-Ulrich is saying, the Villa Borghese as a sculpture gallery was very inspiring. But while we were having a phone conversation, talking about it while I was in the Villa Borghese, walking out, there was one of these acrobats, one of those guys that stands on a bucket and is totally painted in silver and is not moving, looking like a sculpture. So the idea of a living sculpture, but also the idea of having a sculpture gallery where a sculpture is there, even if it's a living body, from 10 in the morning to 7 at night, and when at 7 the exhibition closes, the sculptures walk out. I think that's a very simple description of what the exhibition is.
There's also a rule of the game that every year we do the show once a year, and in a different city. It started in Manchester in 2011 for the festival, Manchester International Festival, then went to the Ruhr Festival. It was a co-production between Manchester and Ruhr in 12. In 2013 it went to Sydney, to John Calder Projects, and now it's in Basel as a collaboration between the Byler Foundation, Art Basel and the Theatre Basel. Every year a new incarnation of the show, every year a new research. Klaus and I always continue the research. We keep finding new living sculptures, we keep finding new artworks which actually fit into the exhibition, or commission also new works for the show. And there's always an additional room. So now we arrived at 14 room, and then a few weeks before the opening, Klaus and I saw this amazing piece, animatronic robotic piece by Jordan Wolfson, and we felt that has to be in the exhibition. That's why it's 14 rooms plus one. So we do actually have 15 rooms now for 2014, and the exhibition will continue to grow in the years to come. So you can almost think it's like a house with more and more rooms. And it's also a little bit a sketch, and that particularly becomes clear here with this amazing architecture of Herzog de Meuron. It's also a sketch somehow of a new institution.
We have up about 35 options now for a room in 14 or 15 or 16 or 17 rooms. So we started out with existing pieces, because what we didn't want is offer an opportunity that is not reflecting what artists are already doing. So it's very important that there are historical pieces like the Bruce Nauman piece from the 60s or the Yoko Ono piece from 1963, because this form of art does exist. So that was an important point. In this round, 14 rooms, we had Otto Bong and Ed Atkins come up with new pieces, so we are commissioning new pieces, which a temporary museum should do as well. So I think this is a very important component, that we have historical pieces, we commission new pieces. And what happened with Jordan Wolfson for us was that the experience of having the live performers here, we felt we needed an epilogue. We needed to reflect the whole exhibition with the, let's say, invention or the prosthetic of a human being being a robot.
We're here in front of the room of Ed Atkins. That brings us right away into the digital age. He presents here an avatar. It's basically on a screen, a very, very strong, digital rendering, and next to it, a living sculpture, and it's almost like flipping sides. It's almost that all of a sudden the sculpture is less real than what we see on the screen. So that is, for example, one of the new pieces which was added here. for the exhibition in Basel. We also have Dominique Gonzalez Förster with a new work which was actually realized for the exhibition here, where we are not allowed to give away the secret of what the piece actually is, because the idea is that the viewer finds himself or herself the rule of the game according to the way they interact with the piece. And that's also something which we think is very important for this exhibition. I mean, Marcel Duchamp said the viewer does half of the work. Dominique Gonzalez Förster once extrapolated that by saying he or she does at least half of the work. And that is definitely true here in the 14+1 rooms in Basel.
I think what Herzog and de Meuron built here is a temporary building. It's a temporary museum. It's a huge structure. It has 14 rooms, but each room has basically a back room, has a green room, has a backup structure. Technical room has a cafeteria. So what Herzog and de Meuron built is a temporary museum featuring sculpture galleries, but the sculptures are all live art or performance-related pieces. So if you have this as a claim, it could be real. What would that mean if it wasn't temporary? It would mean a collection, it would mean commission, it would mean preserving pieces. So I think a museum's role today is not only to be on the art market. That's actually not a function of the museum, but it should single out what is art that's important to exhibit, but then also preserve it, commission it, exhibit it, and preserve it. So a structure like this is a big claim, because I think museums, they might buy performance pieces, but are they really providing the structure to maintain them and to exhibit them? This could be here forever, but how much would that cost to have all these performers? It would be, in a way, a cross between a theater and a museum. Would be quite an experiment.
Which is why it's so interesting that, you know, this exhibition is a collaboration between Bayer Foundation, a museum, Basel, the Art Fair, and the theater in Basel. And as Klaus said, I mean, if you think about, you know, an institution, if you think that this could be a sketch, you know, for something which could last also, it's interesting. As a teenager, I met in Switzerland the playwright Eugène Ionesco, and he was describing to me that actually in the theater world, because he's one of the protagonists in the 50s and 60s of absurd theater, you know, alongside Samuel Beckett, and he was describing to me that whilst he was with me having this coffee, actually for many decades his piece, The Bold Singer, La Cantatrice Chauve, had been performed every single night in Paris. And you know what? It's still being performed. It's been going on now almost for half a century, and there has not been one single evening where La Cantatrice Chauve hasn't been performed. So if this exists for theater, you know, it could also exist for these artworks here, which obviously have a different duration. They are not performances. It's very, very important that these are not performances, because a performance has a very specific, you know, duration. It lasts from 6 to 7, whilst this here is actually the opening hours. It's throughout the opening hours of the museum. It's always there. There is another difference, which is that it's, as Dorothea von Hantelmann shows in her amazing, you know, writing on the exhibition as a ritual, her forthcoming book, is that the exhibition as a ritual is very, very different from the theater, because in the theater you have one person or a few persons who communicate to many. And the exhibition is a much more liberal ritual. So the idea is also how we can actually create this life experience whilst preserving or continuing this very, very, you know, free ritual the exhibition is.
I think contemporary art always has to be totally disruptive. And so what does that mean? I think contemporary art has to be disruptive as it changes your world or the view that you have on the world. So going through 14 rooms, I think you have rooms that are painful or painfully private and personal, that are overwhelmingly intimate, or they just overstep into your own private sphere. So in a strange way, I think the exhibition will halt your daily life, will make an interruption, and in the best of all cases, you're seduced for life and you will never be the same person. I think for us, the exhibition is very much about the human condition. It's not about art, it's about life. And the human condition didn't much change between the 60s and now. What did change, and that led us to the epilogue, is that social media, that devices became so much more important. In the 60s, you just had the video camera being affordable for an artist, but now everybody has a video camera. So I think the idea of having devices be prosthetics, nearly an outsourcing of your body into a machine, that became an important component.
And there are many, of these wonderful transgenerational dialogues in the exhibition, which is again a great advantage if you can work, because things are very fast. We live in an accelerated world, and that means it's accelerated very often for the viewer. And statistics show that actually people spend only a few seconds in front of artworks in museums, even in front of the Mona Lisa. It's only a question of seconds. And we believe that this idea of reintroducing a slowness experience here, it's not an exhibition one can sort of consume. It resists this idea of being consumed in a few minutes. It's an exhibition which slows the viewer down, but it also slows the curators down, because we have actually, by this rule also, that we do it only once a year, that we develop it over many, many years. It's now been 4 years in the making, and it's hopefully going to continue for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So for us, it's also something which allows us in a very slow way, steady way, to advance the research. And in this advancing research, there are more and more transgenerational dialogues. So it's fascinating to have here, for the first time, Bruce Nauman with one of his, amazing, loop pieces which can go on all day long. And obviously these early Bruce Nauman pieces were a great inspiration for the young Tino Segal when he started to come from the world of choreography, into the world of exhibition, and started to completely reinvent through his practice the ritual of the exhibition. So that would be one of these transgenerational dialogues. Another wonderful dialogue is the one between Yoko Ono and Dominique Gonzalez-Förster. Dominique has always told us how inspiring she finds Yoko. Here is a very indirect but beautiful connection. We have the dark room, the participatory dark room of Yoko, where the viewer does at least half of the work, where the viewer has to find out how actually to use that space. And at the same time, we have the space of Dominique, where which is almost like an answer to that and pushes it into another direction. So the viewer will discover, but we're not doing it in a sort of a linear way. So it's not like here it starts and then it goes into a new generation. It's in this sense, a very open field where the viewer can make these connections. And there are many of these transgenerational connections. And obviously, that's the great thing about art. I mean, your question raises the great thing about art. The great artwork is as great, today as it was many decades ago in the case of these older pieces when they were made. And that's true also for some work from centuries ago. We can now look, at the Goya painting, and it has so much meaning in what's happening in the world and all the wars which are happening now, and I think that's been throughout art history, Great art isn't dated. Great art travels through time and can permanently be recharged.
When I'm going to a sculpture gallery, there's just a human figure in marble on a pedestal. I still think, is that a girl or boy? Is that person depicted older, younger? Is that person kind of like at the height of a certain blossom, or a child or an older person? So you immediately compare this with your own body. It's nearly like checking your own body or checking your own being. And just imagine that person on the pedestal is a human being, alive and breathing. So I think it's a very direct experience.
And then we can go from here, into the Kunstmuseum and look at the Holbein painting. And as Georges Uberman says, there it's the same. Ce que je vois, ce qui me regarde, what I look at and what looks at me. And that's very much 14+1 rooms. Ce que je vois, ce qui me regarde.